like 10 minutes before the meeting starts to see if things have changed. Fortunately, I didn't have to try and remember a password to sign in. I thought I was going to have to do that, but okay. Anyway, I'm Doug Fraser. Welcome everyone to a beautiful April evening. And I know there's a bit of a conflict tonight because a bunch of our members and a bunch of non-members are down at the city council meeting, sort of drumming for trying to save or protect Cable Bay because of the issues going on down there. But then we'll also have a wonderful meeting here. So hopefully they'll both be very successful. So without further ado, see if I can get this to work. Oh, and actually just, I know the crowd's not quite as big, just a show of hands here. How many people, are sort of just ongoing Nature Nanaimo members? Okay, and, how many people here are NALT members? Well, we're NALT members too. And, just curious how people found out about this meeting. If was it like through Nature Nanaimo?
Yeah.
Okay, or through NALT? Okay, just a few. Okay, because NALT's been doing a great job of promoting our co-meetings here, so it's been wonderful. Anyway, we'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the traditional territories of the Nanaimo and Snonaas First Nations. And a beautiful spot. This is, I hope you've had a chance to, like, ever since, like, we had a really good herring spawn this year, I think, like a lot of good herring spawns, a lot of great activity. And then the wildflowers are just beautiful now. I don't know if, like, if you go down to Yellow Point now, there's thousands of shooting stars, and the Calypso fairy orchids are coming out now in Yellow Point and Lotus pinnatus, and then Piper's Lagoon, you know, has like thousands of fawn lilies, and it's just, it seems to me it's been a very good year for wildflowers. But sorry,
hundreds of trillions.
of trilliums, say, okay. Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah. And I tell you, anywhere where there's that, I have a hate on for English ivy, because I think that's the worst of the invasives. You know, it's just, it crawls along the ground, and I look at those little trilliums sticking up through the English ivy wherever they are, and I think, man, we're in trouble. But anyway, a mission statement: to foster an interest, appreciation, and enjoyment of nature, and promote the conservation of healthy natural ecosystems in the Nanaimo region. And we have a good online presence, and actually NALT, you know, if you just Google NALT, they have a better online presence than us, a bigger presence than us. But we have a website, an Instagram account, Facebook page, a YouTube channel, and then you can just email us, of course. And I'm going to ask Julie to come up. I just got this news because I missed the email, but this is actually pretty nice news, eh? Oh, I should be using this, sorry.
So, yes, what's KBA status? It's Key Biodiversity Area. And this is a program that was started by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature to identify areas all over the world that are important for biodiversity. And in Canada, it was taken up by, I read this online, 3 nonprofits, one of them being Birds Canada, but I can't remember what the other 2 were. My point being, this is not a government program. This is almost a grassroots effort to identify these important areas. So the fact that Harewood Plains is a key biodiversity area, and the Friends of Harewood Plains are working towards eventually preserving that area, whether it's as a park or some other kind of protected area, it means that when we start applying to foundations and so on for money, being able to say, look, it's a key biodiversity area is really important. So that's really good news. And the Friends of Harewood Plains are basically starting up a group that used to exist 20 years ago. And we will be offering a bunch of tours up to the plains in the next few weeks as the flowers come out. And if any of you can help with leading tours, we really want to lots of people in this town don't even know Harewood Plains exists. So we want them to learn that A, it exists, B, it's beautiful, and C, we got to look after it. So if anybody here wants to lead tours or be a tail on a tour, speak to me and we'll get your name on the list and get this organized. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Julia. That's great. And Harewood Plains is just an amazing area for wildflowers. And that's where, of course, it's slightly famous, I guess, for Lotus pinnatus being there, now called Hosakia pinnata. But there's many other wildflowers there, but the Hosakia are pretty beautiful to see there. Okay, so our upcoming events, and actually you'll see the bottom one there, because I'll address in a second, but so this Saturday, we're going to have an intertidal, there's a really good low tide, midday low tide. So we're going to go down to the Cedar Boat Ramp area and meet at 12. And we've advertised that, sort of sent out the emails about that before, and you can register online if you're coming. And there's a few maps I sent out today for how to get there, but that's always fun. Buttertub interpretive tours, and I'll be sending out an email about this. Nature Nanaimo, we offer tours open to the public 1 day a week, either the Saturday or the Sunday. We alternate between Saturdays and Sunday, except holiday weekends, March through the end of August. May through the end of August. So our first one is coming up in early May. Well, almost the first and second of May, but we will be looking for people to volunteer to lead those tours. And you just go walking around with whoever shows up, and you just be enthusiastic and see what you see. It doesn't, the first year or two, I think we tried to plan. Some were going to be like looking for insects. Some were going to be for, birds or whatever. And then we thought, let's just walk around and whatever, if the turtles are out that day sunning on logs, and it's great to see the Western painted turtles. If it's a cloudier day, you might see something else. So it's a pretty generic tour, and all we want are enthusiastic nature lovers to help lead those tours. Then the very next day, we're going to do some broom busting at Buttertubs, and we'll meet at the Jinglepot parking lot. But most of the broom that we want to get rid of is kind of down around, if you go counterclockwise from the the Jinglepot parking lot. So we'll be doing that on the 3rd, and I'll be sending out a notice about that too. Then on the 9th, we're going to do a birding outing, Stefan leading the way with, we'll bring binoculars, of course, but we'll have a scope with us, and we're going to go birding at the Nanaimo River estuary near the Living Campground, where you get in at that trail there. Or sorry, what's called the Living Forest Campground. And then the Wildflowers of Harewood Plains, I didn't have any dates, and usually Stefan leads one, but we'll coordinate finding dates, and we'll let all of our members know about which dates are available to go for a walk or lead a walk at Harewood Plains, because every year we usually go there sometime in May. It's beautiful. So the Buttertubs Marsh tours, the free tours, start on Saturday, the 2nd of May at 9:30 a.m. And that was one of Linda Stevens' beautiful photos there of those little tree frogs sitting in the cattail seeds. But and then May 9th, we figured May 9th would be a good day because it is the global big bird day. So eBird, like birders around the world, encourage people everywhere, birders, on the 9th of May to go out, do birding, and report their lists on eBird. So it's a good birding day around the world. So we thought we should do a birding outing on the same day. Also coming up, the 22nd of May, St. John's going to lead a walk to Mount Suhalen, the ecological reserve that's near Duncan, quite close to Duncan. I'm like sort of consider it in Duncan, so that's about how far you have to drive. It's a beautiful hillside, sort of like a Gary Oak meadow there. So again, beautiful wildflowers, nice vistas overlooking the valley. Then June 3rd, as you probably all know, we're going to Princess Louisa Inlet. on a tour out of Egmont on the Sunshine Coast. Beautiful, beautiful inlet, quite a ways, a boating trip up to see Chatterbox Falls at the end of Princess Louisa Inlet. And that's already filled, but we were lucky to get September 9th. We're going to have we're going to offer it again because we had a waiting list, and some of the people on the waiting list can go September 9th. Well, that's when the water taxi company, the next date they could give us. So we'll be advertising that too for people who would still like to go. Then June 27th, Chris, there's a picnic. I'll get her up here in a second to talk about that. And then July 14th is What the Hake, and that's the Great Eagle Show, and that's a boat ride, a tour, fairly extensive tour out of Campbell River, where I think the boat leaves the dock at about 10 in the morning, heads across to close to the opening to Butte Inlet. It's like across the Salish Sea there, going through channels, beautiful boat ride, whaling, sea lions, and then some of those narrow channels have quite strong current flow, tidal flows. And so at this time of year, the tide is strong enough. I don't know how dumb hake are. I don't know what it is with hake, but some hake, like a lot of hake, get brought to the surface for a very short period of time. And there's literally, there could be like a few hundred eagles sitting in the trees waiting for this to happen. And then when it happens, there's a feeding frenzy, and these eagles just pick hake out of the water, and then it ends like just shortly thereafter. And so you have this sort of dramatic sudden eagle show, they call it. And so anyway, we're gonna do that on this 14th of July. It's an expensive enough tour. I'll send out information about it, but you'll be able to drive up here from the morning and go on the trip and drive back late at night. So you don't have to stay over in the Campbell River area. It can be just a one-day outing. Okay, the picnic, Chris.
I have a question about the hake trip. Will the boat be going in the area where Ripple Rock was? You know?
I don't know how close it'll be going through.
Thank you.
North of there, right? Yeah.
Hey, everybody, I'm Chris, and I'm excited to tell you about our summer picnic, which is June 27th from noon till 3. And it will be at Bowen Park again, because we figured out that is a really nice place to have the picnic. We did actually look around at some other spots this year just to see if there's anything better, but we didn't find anything better. So it's Bowen Park.
I don't know if the Zoom people can hear you.
Because
they're using that microphone.
Sorry. So the June picnic is always a really casual, pleasurable experience, because for newer people, you get to meet and really talk to other members. And for members that have been here for a long time, there's old faces. That's not nice. But members that have been with us for a long time that they can see again. So it's great. Hopefully we'll have a walk or a hike through Bowen Park, and it's a really lovely occasion. So yeah, and it's a potluck, and there will be activities, and there will be a silent auction. I'm a member of the social committee, so we organize this every year, and we haven't met yet to organize it. So that's why it's still kind of a general idea of here, but we will have a lot more information for you next time.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And because when you have that shelter, it doesn't really matter if it's raining, you can just stand under the huge shelter. Oh, I just threw in this slide because I thought, you know what? There's this funny event that started last year, right? Is it Todd Maffin, who's a CBC retired journalist, and he just made this viral little, I don't know, TikTok or little video thing, inviting Americans to come up to Nanaimo, said, you might like Nanaimo, why don't you come up here and check us out? And he had like 350 people or something actually came. And this was a photo from last year. They had a photo op at Maffeo Sutton Park. So he said, well, let's do it again this year. And they're expecting twice as many. And the reason I put it on here is I thought, like, the people who come, they don't have to, but they're going to be offered these red lanyards. So you'll be able to tell who they are. And I thought it would be fun to at least a few of us to go down there. We have a few little Nature Nanaimo vests. And I know if I was considering moving to a spot, I'd want to know, like, do you guys have like what's nature like here? Do you, can you go birding, or is it like, can you go whale watching? Like, what's the thing? So I just thought if a few of us went down there, just walked around, we might get asked, what the area is like and what our club is like and what it's like to live here for nature viewing. And so I just thought I'd throw it in there. If anyone's interested, they can email me and join me. I'm going to try and make it down there if I can. But it is at noon hour is their photo op event. The actual the infusion event goes from the the Friday to the Sunday or something officially. But at noon hour on the Saturday is where they gather in Maffeo Sutton Park. Oh, and then I mentioned this last time, but just as a little reminder, if people are interested, there is the BioBlitz going on for the Yellow Point Ecological Society is having their BioBlitz, and you can just Google Yes BioBlitz if you want any information on that. I want to participate in that, and it's all like sort of down in that Ladysmith Yellow Point area. Okay, so Nault, I'm going to ask Linda to come up here and talk about what Nault would like to do.
And then I'm introducing them.
Yeah.
Okay,
I have, there's,
okay, I'm gonna very
oh, you
quickly.
want to just talk in front of Zoom?
Okay,
Oh,
gotta
yeah.
get under. Okay, hello. I see Judy. Hi, Judy. Okay, so my name is Linda Broymans. I'm the stewardship manager for Nanaimo and Area Land Trust, and we've been kind of working with Nature Nanaimo for the last, 6 months or so. In terms of presentations and sharing information and that. And so I was asked by the Nault board, it's like, can you also present some of our events? Because Doug does a really good job about presenting the Nature Nanaimo event. So I'm going to present a little bit about projects that we have starting up again this year. The first of which is our Western Painted Turtle Conservation Project. In particular, we're looking for volunteers to be turtle ambassadors with us at Buttertubs Marsh and Diver Lake. And it just consists of during the nesting season from mid-May to mid-July. We have volunteers who walk during the peak nesting hours in areas where we know turtles nest, looking for nesting turtles, and then recording that information, doing outreach with the public at Buttertubs. They're very curious about turtles. And just making sure there's no human interference or dogs or that kind of thing with the turtles as they're on land. And then protecting those nests from predators, because we discovered that those nests are very vulnerable to predation, mostly by raccoons. So in order to give those little eggs a chance to develop, we cage those nests from predators. And we're also asking, we have a project assistant, Caitlin Watson, who is very, very passionate about Western Painted Turtles and any kind of amphibians and reptiles, really. And she's been putting up posters, you might have seen them around, asking people, help us find Western Painted Turtles at all different sites, basically across the Mid-Island region from the Ladysmith area up to definitely Lanceville, maybe even Parksville. We've definitely seen, I've gotten reports of turtles at a wetland in Parksville that one's confirmed to be a Western Painted Turtle. So having all that information is really helpful to us to know where they are. So if you see them, if you're out and about and you see a turtle and you get a photo, like this lovely one that Linda Stevens took, Please share it either on iNaturalist, or you can share it directly to Caitlin at turtles@nault.bc.ca. We even have a few people who are really keen to help Caitlin with this, and so she's linked with them. And if you're interested in doing that, because you walk a lot during sunny times in the early spring around wetlands, please send her an email and be a part of our project. Okay, what else do I have? Oh yeah, on the 25th, Wally Creek, if you live in that area, North Nanaimo, where you have another restoration project mostly dealing with invasive species, and shoring up some of the work that we've done. We've been working at the site for over a decade now, and it's an urban stream, so it has a lot of issues that are still ongoing. So we could definitely use people's help with that site.
I think the soon,
Saturday, the 25th. Did I have one more? I thought I had one more. The T one?
yeah, I forgot.
Okay, sorry.
I was
Okay,
in there.
there's also a tea at the Nault Nursery, a Mother's Day tea with native plants from Saturday, May 9th from 10 to 2:30. If you're interested in that, I'm going to take my daughter, because when she was in forest school, when she was 4, they made tea out of mint or something. And she just talks about this all the time, that it was the most amazing thing. So I'm going to take her to this because I think it'll be great. But yeah, it's definitely an adult activity. I'm just bringing my daughter to. Send an email to plants@nault.bc.ca.
And I'll send our membership that.
Okay,
that-
wonderful. Thank you. Okay, now I get to introduce Elke. I've known Elke for 10 years now. We were just talking when I was a leader for Nature Kids. She had created this amazing citizen science project that kids could be involved in, called an amphibian road survey, where we walked at night on a rainy fall day, walking a road where amphibians were likely to cross either from the wetland to the forest or forest to the wetland, depending on what season. And we looked for squished amphibians. Actually, often we would find not yet squished amphibians, which we got to help cross the road. It was a great experience for kids, and it was just really wonderful that Elke was able to develop this project. And she's been doing many, many things with Nault over the years, and in this area. So Elke got her MSc in conservation biology from UBC in 1996. She became a registered professional biologist in 2003, but has been working in the as a self-employed contract biologist since 2002, that's impressive as a self-employed biologist in our area. Specializing in the conservation of amphibian populations. She specializes in habitat associations and requirements of amphibians in relation to the impacts of timber harvesting, rural and urban development, and that we've definitely worked with Elke on some of those issues, and linear infrastructure projects like roads, trails, pipeline right-of-ways, that kind of thing. And non-native species, which, as everyone knows, is an ongoing issue. I'm sure you have many tales to tell about that. So without further ado, here's her most recent project or longest running project. I'm not quite sure, but her very interesting project on Western painted toads. Thanks, Elke.
And I think this is okay.
Linda? Haven't tried to do this before, having people on Zoom and making sure they can see and hear me, but I also tend to wander, so might need to keep me in line. Big button.
Yeah, I think it should work now, maybe.
If I need
Does it?
to go back.
Oh,
Okay.
Great. Fingers crossed. And I don't know how many people have showed up at least 2 other times to try to see this talk. I apologize for that. I kept thinking for the past week, I'm like, something's gonna happen, something's gonna happen. Don't lose your voice, don't get in a car accident. Okay, so I made it, we're here, and I'm really excited. Thank you so much for coming. This is my favorite topic in the world. I absolutely love Western toads, they're adorable. So I'm hoping by the end of this 30 minutes or so that you're going to be feeling exactly the same way. It's the cutest species in the world, but they have it tough. So what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of 4 main areas I'm going to go over for those of us that might not know that much about amphibians. I'm going to talk about the amphibians of Vancouver Island, get us all on the same page. Then go through a year in the life of an aquatic breeding amphibian, because a lot of people don't really have a clear understanding of what their life style throughout the whole year is really like. So we'll talk about that. Then I'm going to go into some of the research that we've done on toads and why they have it tough here on Vancouver Island. So the amphibians are an interesting group. There's about, I think this might be an old slide. I think we might be up to almost 6,000 species now around the world. 3 main groups, the Salamandridae, which includes the newts. So newts are salamanders, but not all salamanders are newts. The anurans, frogs and toads. All toads are frogs, but not all frogs are toads. And the caecilians, we don't have any caecilians here, so we're just in the first 2 categories. We have 3 terrestrial breeding salamanders. We have 3 aquatic breeding salamanders on the island. And then we have 3 native frog and toad species and 2 exotic frog species. The only listed species we have on the island are the wandering salamander, one of the terrestrial breeding species, and then the red-legged frog and western toad are listed federally, not provincially. These are the terrestrial breeding salamanders. We have 3 of them. The wandering salamander, in fact, the one on the bottom is only found on Vancouver Island. Very interesting species. The next closest populations are actually down in Oregon, I believe it is. We don't really have a clear understanding of how they got here and why there's such a big gap in between the populations. So that's an interesting story, mystery that we're trying to solve. Western redback salamanders and ensitinas. So for anyone who doesn't know terrestrial breeding salamanders, they don't need to go to water at all. They're fully terrestrial and they're lungless. They are breathing 100% through their skin. So that really affects the way that they live daily. They have to stay moist in order to have that oxygen passing through their skin. And so they're very forest dependent. These are species that you don't find in the interior or down in the drier environments. They tend to be very forest dependent, and they also tend to stay undercover a lot or completely underground. What I'm going to be focusing more on are the aquatic breeding species, of which we have 3 aquatic breeding salamanders, the northwestern salamander, the rough-skinned newt, and the long-toed salamander. And then we have the 3 frog and toad species, western toad on the top, red-legged frogs, and Pacific tree frogs. What's really interesting with the aquatic breeding species, it's similar to birds in that they all have birds have unique calls, amphibians have all very unique eggs that they're laying in the wetlands. The northwestern salamanders up in the top left have these very thick jelly egg masses about the size of a large orange. I always say you could actually lift that egg mass out of the water and throw it like a softball. It's so hard and dense. In contrast, the red-legged egg mass, also very big, but if I was to try to lift that out of the water, it would sort of all fall apart. The jelly layer is much softer, thinner. And then the Pacific tree frog and the long-toed salamander lay these smaller egg masses, but the tree frogs have a much higher density of embryos within the egg mass compared to the long-toed. And then long-toads can also lay their eggs singly, just like rough-skinned newts, they lay their eggs singly. The young that are hatching out of these egg masses of the salamanders, we tend to refer to those as larvae. And then the young that are coming out of frogs and toads, we tend to refer to those as tadpoles. Even though technically they're all larvae, we tend to use that terminology just to help us understand what we're looking at. With the salamanders, they have external gills. So if you're seeing something swimming in the water and you can see the gills, big fluffy gills, then you know you've got a salamander larva. With the tadpoles, their gills are hidden underneath an operculum. The western toads, these guys are unique in the sense that they're laying strings of eggs. So we are trying to locate and confirm where western toad breeding sites are. So if you're ever coming across strings of eggs, 100% guaranteed you found yourself a toad breeding site. And they all lay communally. They're all laying at the exact same time. It often occurs within a very small window. They breed just slightly later than the other aquatic breeding species here. So we're just finishing the breeding for toads right now, whereas everybody started laying and finished probably almost a month ago. And they're all laying at the same time in a shallow area. They're absolutely crazy when they're breeding. I think it's adorable, but it's a little crazy and it's not very fun if you're a female toad. The toads don't make a call, so they're not making an advertisement call. What you're hearing when you're walking through the forest at this time of year are the tree frogs. They're the only ones that we can hear right now. The western toads do make a sound, but that is a release call. So males are just wired to chase anything in the pond when they get there. And if they grab something and it squeaks, then they know to let go because they've grabbed another male. And that's the only way they know. So if it doesn't make a squeak, they hang on for dear life. Sometimes they get it wrong. They're holding onto a stick or they're holding, I've seen a picture of one holding onto a fish, a koi swimming along. So they're not particularly smart. Those hormones when they're breeding are really strong and they can, I've even had them like gripping my hand. They're pretty single-minded at that time of year. Sometimes they get a little bit crazy when they do get onto a female. If there's not one male that's on the back pushing the other males off, they can end up in a big mating ball and sometimes the females get drowned. So it's not always nice being a female. But the females, when they do decide to lay, they lay 10,000 to 16,000 eggs. Yeah, we're dealing with a lot of eggs. And because they've just all bred at the same time, the eggs are all laid roughly at the same time within a 3-day window. They're all going to develop at the same rate. So that's a big difference between the other native species where they're laying over weeks long period. They're developing at different rates because they're at different locations within the water body, different water temperatures. They're going to come out at random periods throughout the summer. But with the toads, they're all laying at the same time. The eggs will hatch at the same time. The tadpoles will actually stay together and school. So if you see large schools of black tadpoles in a water body, that's also toads. They'll swim around together and stream together. And then when they're ready to metamorphose, they will all come out onto land together. And you'll have hundreds of thousands of little tiny toadlets moving through the landscape. So remember some of these characteristics that they've evolved to survive in our world that don't always work out in our urban environments. So the last two species we have are the non-natives. That's the American bullfrog in the top right there and the green frog. So these are native to Eastern North America. I'm sure you're all familiar with the story that they've been sort of inadvertently or purposefully released into the environment because of frog leg farming attempts. And then they're spreading rapidly through our environment. The bullfrog in the top right there is actually about the size of a dinner plate. And the little plastic frog on the top is about the size of a native tree frog. So you're pretty vulnerable to the predation of these guys. They're very aquatic. They basically stay in the water almost all the time. So this is what most people think of as all of our native amphibians, is this frog on a lily pad, just hangs out in the water all the time. But our native amphibians aren't like that. They come, they breed, and they leave. So they're actually very, very terrestrial. So these guys are quite different. They also overwinter in the water body. So they're dependent on permanent water bodies. And the tadpoles take more than a year to metamorphose. So our native species are really only vulnerable to these introduced species when they are trying to coexist in permanent water bodies. So one of the best ways to protect our native species is to protect the smaller ephemeral seasonal wetlands because the bullfrogs can't survive there. Trying to get rid of them at this point, it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. So the only few efforts that are taking place that might be successful at getting rid of bullfrogs are where we have isolated environments where they won't get reintroduced. So some of the Gulf Islands and places like that, the Okanagan, some of those places. But around here, they're here to stay. So in order to understand sort of the vulnerability of Western toads, let's go through what their life cycle looks like over the year. In the winter, they're dormant, so they can't withstand freezing temperatures. So like all of our native amphibians, they need to find some place to go where they're not going to be exposed to freezing conditions. So they're overwintering on land. Most of our species are overwintering on land, which a lot of people don't know. In late winter, starting in about, depends on the year, anywhere from February to March, they come out of that winter dormancy and they head to the breeding pond. And in this area, they're breeding usually in about March or April. And as I just went through the whole rigmarole, we've got this very intense week or so of breeding. And then they're exiting the wetland and going back up into the upland habitats. So those toads are really only at the wetland, sometimes for a week if you're a female, might be 2 or 3 weeks if you're male, and then you're terrestrial. You are terrestrial for 11 months of the year, if not more. So a very terrestrial species. The eggs and the tadpoles are in the water body associated with that blue dotted line there. So that's the only time we've got toads in the wetland as eggs or as tadpoles. Then those little tadpoles will metamorphose and come up onto land. And we have another sort of migration period at that time with all these little toadlets dispersing. So we've had adults come in, adults leave. Midsummer, all of these little metamorphs are leaving. We've got another dispersal event. And then in the fall, everybody goes, ooh, I need to get to my overwintering site. And we have a fourth migration. So that's when everybody's moving towards their overwintering sites. So a lot of movement going on in the upland habitat. And as I said, we're spending most of the time on land. We're really not that aquatic. In terms of these aquatic breeding amphibians in general, though, in terms of where they're going to lay their eggs, they'll use a really wide variety of habitat types. They'll use a lot of natural water bodies, but in particular, the ones that they're often very successful at are the smaller ephemeral water bodies, because they're not going to have as many predators there, but they also tend to warm up more, faster, and the egg and larval development or tadpole development rate is related to that water temperature. So everything you know about fish, we're actually thinking the opposite way when it comes to amphibians. They want to be in sunny water bodies. They want to be where the water will warm up, because remember, they're breeding this time of year. It's not very warm. So any extra degree or two that they can get in the water is going to help speed up their development. But of course, they will also take advantage of artificial water bodies. And that's where we have to be really careful, because we can create habitats that aren't really suitable for amphibian breeding, but they will make a go of it. So they'll use the stormwater ponds that we have along the sides of the highway. They'll use golf course ponds. They'll just even use road ruts, or ditches, things like that. So wherever we have water, they will make a go at trying to breed there. But what we really don't know is, what are they doing for that 10, 11 months or more that they're on land? Where are they going? What do they need? How far are they traveling? It's a really big mystery, actually. So that leads us into the research studies that we've done on toads. And I just want to really quickly acknowledge that this isn't just me. It's a large effort that has managed to collect all of this information. The great field crew that we had for the years that we were doing telemetry, a lot of partners, a lot of biologists with the government, and different funding sources. In terms of why we focused on toads, other than the obvious fact that they're absolutely adorable, they are listed as special concern federally, as I mentioned. Part of the reason why they're listed is because we did see some pretty drastic declines of some toad populations within their range. And some of the really disturbing parts were that we saw declines in places like the southern Rocky Mountains in Colorado, in big parks. So in an area where they should have been okay, there was no development pressure, anything going on in terms of humans. So that was really concerning, because we didn't know why that was happening. And through research, we determined that there was a fungal disease. I'm sure you've heard of the chytrid fungus, or BD is another term for it. So there was a disease that we determined was causing declines in a lot of different areas around the globe. And so western toads have been susceptible to that. And then the other thing that we know for sure is that just based on the general behavior and biology of this species, they're very vulnerable to urban development, in particular roads, because they're moving around a lot. They're moving kilometers when they're in the landscape. You know, we tend to think, oh, if we put a buffer around that lake or wetland, the amphibians will be fine. No, these guys are moving kilometers. So a little buffer is not going to do much for these guys. So our research started back in 2011 and 2012. Actually, in 2010, we held a herpetofauna and roads conference at VIU. And we had some biologists from the Ministry of Transportation there. So they supported some road surveys. And one of the places that we did road surveys is at a site near Duncan. So I did surveys there 2011 and 2012 in the spring and the fall. And I was trying to figure out if we could locate road crossing hotspots. So we knew there were issues on these roads with a lot of amphibians, and in particular western toads being killed adjacent to a breeding site. So we had those couple years of data. In terms of why we were focused on roads, as I mentioned, we had those 4 different in and out migrations going on from these breeding sites, and we know that toads move kilometers, and all these metamorphs are dispersing up into the upland habitat all together, all at once in this massive wave. If there's trails, if there's roads, it doesn't matter. They will just keep going. So we know we've got issues with these multiple migrations per year. They have to get to the breeding site each year, and then they have to get back to these overwintering areas. They don't have any choice. And we know that amphibians will and do cross roads. They are not barriers to movements. For some species, when they do telemetry work, I know there's somebody who was doing some research on snakes. They will not, some of them just will not cross roads. But we know that that's not an issue with amphibians. They will make an effort to try to cross a road. And what happens with toads, unfortunately, is they actually get attracted to roads. So this is one of those horrible scenarios where it's just a storm waiting to happen. So what we see with these guys is they're active at night. They hang out all day, they rest, they sleep, and then they're nocturnal. Right after sunset is when they get active. And one of the first things they do if they're near a road is they'll go out onto the road, they'll flatten their belly out onto the road, and they'll absorb whatever heat they can get from the road before they start foraging. So these guys are what the common term cold-blooded or ectothermic. So everything they do is related to their body temperature. They can't metabolize their food until they're warm enough. So, and their muscles don't function very well unless they're warm enough. So they get out onto the road, they flatten themselves, and of course, if vehicles come along, then they're in trouble. Ease of movement. When we did telemetry on the toads, they get onto a road and they just follow it perfectly. They're not dumb. They're just like bears. They're like deer. They're like us. If you come across a trail when you're hiking, you're going to take the trail. It's just so much easier. It's more energy efficient. So they follow roads because it's easy. But also what's really interesting is when you think about it, roads and the roadsides are a completely unique habitat, let's call it, compared to anything else nearby. So they have an interesting thermodynamics along the road surface. You've got this potentially a gravel area. You might have a ditch. You've got the mowed grasses on the side. You've probably got all unique sort of invertebrates and things that are associated with it. Different sorts of microclimates. You might have water in the ditch. So it's its own sort of habitat that offers different sorts of things for lots of different wildlife. And then, unfortunately, what we have found is that even very low traffic volumes can just wreak havoc. So you've got these amphibians that get out on the road and they don't move very fast, or they're just purposely sitting there. So it only takes a few cars to cause a lot of mortality. So this is our study site in the Duncan area. And what you see there, I hope we don't have too many red-green colorblind people in the audience, but what we have are where we located the hotspots. So this is a combination of the fall surveys Yeah, that's the fall surveys for the 2 different years. And so the green is the whole sort of survey area. Yellow, we have some amphibians, and the red are where we have the hot spots. So that's what we were trying to figure out, because once MOT was on board with this, they were willing to install underpasses at the site in 2013, as soon as I had the results from my road surveys. But unfortunately, the land right adjacent to our breeding site, a big 40+ hectare lot, was being sold out of private forestry, and there was a development proposed. So we didn't want to put underpasses underneath the road and send our toads straight into a development that was going to potentially happen, new homes, roads, driveways, whatever. So we thought, let's just wait and see what's going on, because we knew that they didn't want to, CVRD didn't want to push that rezoning through for that density of housing. So we knew there was a bit of a struggle there. So we thought, let's just hold off and see what's going to happen. Eventually, that lot was sold to one landowner. So we thought, okay, a little more comfortable with that. Let's get these underpasses in. So back in 2021, we installed 5 underpasses. Ministry of Transportation spent about $200,000. We put in 5 underpasses with directive fencing. So just because you put a tunnel in under a road does not mean an amphibian wants to go through it. They don't want to go through it. So you have to put fencing in that guides them towards that underpass, and you're basically forcing them through. It's kind of like tough love. So what we have are these half, basically the plastic underpass culvert that we're putting in. We cut those in half and we use that as fencing. So it's this half rounded so that they can't climb up it, and they just are forced to follow it along. Ideally, you have it on a slight angle so that as they hit that fence, they naturally will want to keep going in the direction that they were sort of already heading. Whereas if you make it too perpendicular, you have no idea if it's 50-50, they could go right or left. So success. We managed to get some underpasses at the site. But what happened in the interim between 2015 and 2017 is that we were realizing that we really know nothing about where these guys are overwintering, and their terrestrial habitat use. So that's when we started our overwintering study, and we had some provincial support on that. And we were studying hibernation or overwintering. It's not a true hibernation, but overwintering, because like I said, we really didn't know what was going on. But what we suspected from the research, from the literature, is that the hibernation or overwintering sites could be just as important as an aquatic breeding site. But we have no idea where they are. You can't protect something if you don't know where it is. So there was quite an extensive study, a PhD study in Alberta, that did the exact same thing, put these little transmitters on the toads, tracked them to their overwintering sites. And they did find that they were at least 1 kilometer away from the breeding site, so quite far away. And they found that they were communal. So these guys, they're not a social organism. They don't hang out together, yet they were all finding the same hole and then going into overwintering together. So the fact that it was so far away from the breeding site and communal led the authors to think that maybe these are limited within the landscape, because they're all kind of being forced to use these same little holes and quite far away. So we thought, I wonder if they are communal and if these are really, really important habitats. And luckily, with advancements in technology, we're now able to put, little transmitters on little toads compared to, a big deer or a cougar or some sexy animal like that. So what did we learn? Where do they hibernate? So we tracked over 60 toads over the 3-year period, and we found 28 hibernacula. In a broad sense, what I found particularly interesting, because we were capturing them, we would start in September. So the first rains that come in September is what triggers all of the toads to start moving towards their hibernacula. So we know that they were going to be doing those movements. We set out road transects that we were basically driving within a 5-kilometer radius of the breeding site. We had no idea what direction, where they were going to come from. We drove every single road within that 5 kilometers. And then whenever we came across a toad, we would catch it, bring it back to our processing center, fit it to a proper sized sexy little belt around the waist, and a transmitter, take some measurements, put a pit tag in the toad, and then we would take it back to the exact spot where we captured it so it could continue on its way. Every 3 or 4 days, we go back and relocate that toad, just make sure we don't lose it. And then we get a location on the toad. So we have all those movements from the fall, which are just sort of bonus information, because really what we just wanted to know was ultimately where were they going to end up. So we had all that movement data. And what we found really interesting was in all that time of them moving around through the landscape. So this is the landscape in the Satlam area of Duncan, if you're familiar with it. It's sort of like the outer area of Jingle Pot or Yellow Point. It's sort of hobby farms, that sort of a landscape, a mosaic of landscape. And what we found is even though some toads would rest during the day near somebody's shed or wood pile or something like that, along the edge of their driveway or something, none of them overwintered anywhere near a built environment. So they would all go back into mostly more sort of natural environments when they overwintered. And what was also interesting was 70% of our toads hibernated in or close to relatively open habitat. So here's the sort of the breakdown here. So we only had 30% of our toads go into what we consider a forest patch or a forest stand. So 70% of them were mostly along sort of some kind of edge habitat. So you've got forest on one side and something else on the other side. So it's a little bit more open. And then we had about almost 30% in a maturing clear cut, which was actually that 40-hectare bit of land that got sold to that one developer. So he had 30% of our hibernacule on his property. More specifically, what these look like, the toads are hibernating, like I said, away from freezing temperature. So they're trying to get down below ground. A lot of times they were actually associating with some sort of woody structure. And if you think of it, wood is actually quite nice thermally. It tends to feel, actually kind of warm. You don't want to snuggle up to a rock, or water can be a little bit unpredictable. So a lot of them were either under large logs, but what was interesting was a lot of them were down rotted stumps. So we don't have any mammals on the island here that are going to dig nice burrows that they can just go down into. In Alberta, they were actually using, beaver dams and beaver lodges and things like that. So things that we don't really have a lot of access to here. And this is something, if anybody knows a forester that could help with this or studies trees, a lot of our stumps, they were rotting from the inside out. So you see it in the picture here. So you end up with this hollow that goes down sometimes 1 meter, 2 meters, and then the roots are like straws. They're like a little tunnel, right? It's hollowed from the inside out. So they've got a perfect way to get down. They can't dig their own hole down underground. So they're able to get down into these stumps and then follow these pathways and get down underground. And that's where they were going. So that was a very common place to get to a nice warm environment. Unfortunately, a lot of the structures that they were using, when you just looked at it from the surface, you'd have no idea that it was there, that it's even visible. We would have to really root around and figure out where they are, what's going on underground. Some of these rotted out stumps would end up with just sort of dirt on the top. You can't really tell that there's an old stump under there until you'd see a little hole. You start digging and you realize it's actually got like a wood roof to it down underground. And there's something going on under there. So it's very difficult to protect something when you can't see it. We did put cameras at what we suspected was the entry hole for the hibernacula. So what could happen sometimes is they would slip out of these belts. They were designed in such a way that they were stretchy, so that if they ever got hooked on vegetation or something like that, they're able to pull their leg through and keep on. Otherwise, they're going to get stuck, and that's not going to be good for them. So they do drop their belts on occasion. And so what we had to do was put cameras at these holes, set it on time lapse. It takes a picture every minute, and just monitor it for weeks and months, and just hope we capture them coming out of the hole. And then that was really the only way to confirm, yes, that was where the toad was, because it could be a dropped belt underground. And we did have that on occasion. No toad came out of the hole. So So anyways, we have some great images of toads coming out on our cameras. We did notice, we did have some communal use, not very much though, not like they had in Alberta. So we did have more than one toad come out of some of our hibernacula. And then I did put cameras back at some of these holes the following years. And one of them for sure was used for at least another 3 years. Whether it was the same toad, I don't know, because, you know, she didn't have a belt on anymore, but it was definitely reused. So that was very interesting. So let's move into now that you kind of understand a bit about the biology and what's going on, into what these guys really need. So we know they have these really long migrations. They're moving through the landscape in massive scale relative to their body size. They need to move safely between where they need to get to breed and where they need to overwinter. And then there's also even a third habitat. They have summer foraging habitat, which can be even quite a bit farther. So when they hibernate, they actually move back closer towards the breeding pond. So they've been even farther away than the distance of where their hibernacula is. So the threat really is that in all these movements is they're gonna have to cross roads. You know, in our environment here on Vancouver Island, especially on the east side of the island, we have a lot of roads and a lot of traffic. So traffic density and volume are a big threat. And just to give you an idea of how far they were moving. So again, we captured them in the fall. So I have distances here from where we caught them, and then how far they had to move to get to their hibernacula. So where we caught them is somewhat irrelevant. They were, you know, just somewhere foraging in the summer, and we happened to intercept them in the fall. And then the average distance they moved from where we caught them to where they finally hibernated was 500 meters. But we had a distance of 2 kilometers from where we caught one to where it finally hibernated. And then the distance from the capture point to the breeding sites, we had up to almost 3 kilometers away. So they're moving quite a bit. And then really the distances that are interesting are the distances between the hibernacula and the breeding site. And that was averaging about 474 meters. The females though, and males differ. The males are closer at like 342 meters on average to the breeding site. So in the fall, they're moving closer because remember, as soon as they come up from overwintering, they're off to breed. So the males want to get a little head start. They want to get to the breeding site as soon as possible. The females are like, nah, I'm going to hibernate over there, because if they get intercepted by a male on their way, he will jump on her back and she has no way to get him off, and she'll have to carry him all the way to the breeding site. I was doing a road survey once in the spring, and as I'm walking on the road with my flashlight, I could hear the squeak of a toad at the edge of the road. And I was like, that's so strange. And I look over and there's a big boulder and there's a female trying to get under the boulder with a male on her back, but he's feeling the pressure of the boulder. And so he's squeaking because he's feeling that pressure, thinking it's another male. And I seriously think she's trying to get him off and was trying to get under this boulder and trying to get him off. So it was very funny. So one of the things that I found most interesting was, again, this extra information that we had from the fact that we were tracking them throughout the whole fall period, which was not the main objective of our project, but they moved in incredibly straight line distances. So picture a landscape like out in Cedar, out Jingle Pot area, and a toad is just moving straight through the landscape. You know, what it's going to be moving through to get there. So here's an image here. So here's the scale on the bottom, 5 kilometers. Every one of those lines is one of the pathways that the toad followed from its capture point. And it's from all different directions, right? The breeding site is here in the middle, Wake Lake there with the yellow dot. Isn't it fascinating how pretty straight they're going? If you think of how small the animal is and that it's cued in for kilometers, that's where my breeding site is over there. Yeah, it's fascinating to me that they have such an incredible ability to orient themselves, which also explains why they don't want to go into an underpass under a road, right? If they're using any sort of celestial, electromagnetic, even smell, whatever it is they're using to get there, that can mess with that a little bit. So that was really fascinating to me. But what it also tells us is the things that we're trying to do to protect nature, really what it comes down to is, what do? We put buffers on wetlands and lakes, and we put buffers along streams. They're not gonna hop from one buffer to another buffer to another buffer. No, they're going straight through the landscape. So a lot of those things that we're attempting to do on that level is not really working for them in this scenario, in these migrations. It's great to protect the water quality. It's protecting the breeding site. We definitely need that, but it's not doing anything for these big migrations. So I want to go through one of the fall migrations just to let you have a look at what it looked like with some ortho imagery. So T41, we didn't give them really sexy names. Toad 41, she moved over 1,500 meters between September 22nd and November 7th. And like a lot of toads, she had to cross a lot of roads before she got to her hibernation site from where we caught her. So the little pink star there, that's where we caught her. And then up in the top left, that's where the breeding site is. The scale there, that's, well, she moved 1,500 meters, so you're gonna see what the scale is there. So we caught her, we come back a few days later. Actually, sometimes we come back the next day just to make sure she hasn't immediately slipped out of her belt or there's nothing wrong. She hadn't moved very much, just one little blip there. Then we probably waited another 3-4 days to get her. She'd done her first road crossing. 3-4 days later, she stopped right in front of a road. Another 3-4 days later, she made her second road crossing. And then she finally settled in after her third road crossing. So this is one fall just from where we happened to have caught her to where she finally overwintered. That's not, she still has to cross this big road to get to her breeding site. Then when she's done, like it's just, they must be just constantly crossing roads. And it's just, you know, a bit of roulette, bit of Russian roulette. Am I going to get across this time or am I not going to get across this time? It's kind of scary. So the second thing that the toads are really struggling with is that they really actually have quite a limited number of breeding sites. It's something really strange going on with the Western toad. So I've surveyed hundreds of water bodies on the island, and these guys definitely have the lowest probability of breeding. Like they're the least likely species that I'm going to find breeding compared to all of our other native species. So on the mainland, so these guys have a huge range. On the mainland, these guys will breed in ditches, road rut ponds. You talk to someone from the interior, oh, toads, they're everywhere. But they're actually, even in the interior, they're really not. They also have a low probability of breeding. But they will use ephemeral water bodies. And I don't find them in ephemeral water bodies on Vancouver Island, and I don't know why. We've done some genetic work on them, and they're not, you know, a subspecies or anything at this point, but it's very odd that they're not taking advantage of ephemeral water bodies. And their breeding sites are really disparate and far apart. So they're quite vulnerable because of that. So unfortunately, we don't know where the breeding sites are. And then there's a lot of threats to the few breeding sites that they do have. We have a lot of wetland drainage, as we all know. When we do have water bodies, and if we do allow any sort of human access, then we end up with a lot of potential issues with the introduction of non-native species into the area, diseases and those sorts of things. And one of those things that I'm constantly struggling with is even where we know we have a toad breeding site, and I've worked really hard to try to establish good relationships, like with the CVRD down in Duncan, I still run into things where they're taking out a beaver dam at the wrong time of year, like right after the eggs have been laid. So the water level is dropping really quickly. Or doing, you know, some road work right during the migration period where, you know, we've got a lot of adults going across. So they have access to somebody that they could just give a quick email or a phone call. And even though I've, you know, given them talks and stuff, we still have some problems with communication. There's definitely a lot of problems with non-native species. We've got a lot of bullfrogs and green frogs in that site, so not sure how that's impacting them. One of the big problems with Western toads is actually what we call subsidized predators. Don't know how many people have heard of that term. A lot of the species that you see here in the urban environment that are native species, they just do really well with people, right? So they're subsidized. They're using our structures to maybe spend the winter in. They're eating our garbage or out of our compost. They might be sleeping in your shed or something like that. So if you think about the raccoons, the corvids, that would be an example of a subsidized predator where they tend to do really well around people, and then we get elevated populations. So one thing that's interesting is these guys also tend to be very smart species. They know how to get around the toxin of the toads. They know how to cue in and remember sort of when the breeding season is, and they'll get in and they'll hammer the adults. When they're all doing that communal breeding and the males are just obsessed, the hormones are going crazy, like you can walk right up to them. The water is so shallow. It's just so easy for a predator to pick them off. So that's another example of how they've just naturally evolved and what's worked for them forever. As soon as you get near an urban environment, near humans, you've got these subsidized predators, it doesn't work so well for them anymore. They're just really vulnerable to predation. A friend in Oregon was looking at toad populations away from humans in parks down there. And then some of the populations she knew near where there were humans. And for sure, there was much higher predation rates by these subsidized predators as the breeding sites were closer to humans. And we definitely have images of raccoons just going in every single night and just hitting the toads. So the last thing is they obviously need to be able to reach their overwintering sites on land. They need to be able to access them, and they need to be protected. But unfortunately, we don't know where a lot of them are. Any sort of loss of natural cover and natural habitat means we're probably losing hibernacula. So if we have different types of landscapes, obviously the urban environment is the worst one. That's permanent habitat loss, but forestry is actually temporary, other than the loss of old growth forest for sure. We're not going to argue over that, but it is temporary in the sense that we still have a lot of microsites and a lot of habitat complexity. And what we saw with the toads, because they were overwintering along edges, this sort of mosaic landscape, actually fantastic for toads. They do really well. Things like agriculture also really a permanent loss of habitat. You've lost all that complexity. Anytime you're grubbing, taking those stumps out, loss of all that downed wood, there's just nothing left for them there. And the protection of these old rotted out stumps. You know, if you've got some on your property, just know we've had cameras there. There's a lot of things that are going in there through the winter. We had salamanders, we had lots of little frogs, tons of insects. You'll get snakes going in there. I call them the little condos for the amphibians. So really, to ensure that we have enough habitat complexity, we have to protect a variety of habitat types at a variety of scales. Just an example of why we need to have landscape level management. So here's where the parks are. The breeding site is here in the middle. There's the few underpasses that we've put in, and this is the landscape that the toads are working at. So there's the protected areas. And this is where we had most of our toad hibernation sites, right? There's something about that box right there that I don't know if there's something special geologically or what's going on, but they're all mostly in that area. And this is where all of the development is going on in the area right now. And so it's pretty frustrating. I just kind of feel like this population is probably doomed. Every time we have more development and more houses go in, I see more and more traffic on the roads. And like I said, it takes very little traffic on these roads to cause quite a bit of problems. So it's a little bit frustrating. So what they ultimately need is, because this is an animal, that needs to be managed on a landscape level. So anyone who's got, you know, skin in the game within 5 kilometers of this breeding site has something to contribute to the protection of that species. So it takes a lot of collaboration and compromise. We need to be working with government, with private forest industry, with anybody who's got a wetland on their property, private landowners. So it's really who's managing the roads, who's taking care of the roads, who's thinking about traffic volume, who can put in underpasses, who's got a wetland on their property. You know, we need to protect a variety of wetlands in the landscape. Forest companies, whether it's private forest industry, private woodlot owners, government, crown land, and everybody on the landscape needs to be protecting stumps and downed wood. These are really important for all of our amphibians, but especially for toads. We definitely have people who care about toads. We had a ton of people in our Duncan study area that let us know when they had a toad on their property. So we were doing the road surveys, but also people would just give us a call any time of day. If you see a toad on your property, let us know. We would let them name the toad. And just a lot of local support. So, and as these toads are moving through the landscape, this is private land, right? So we had phone numbers, we had sent out, we had done a big mail out in this area. Our toad would be moving and we would kind of, we'd come to a fence, we'd go, oh shoot, our toad is somewhere in there according to our radio that's telling us it's in there somewhere. So then we have to give them a call. Can we come in? And I can't believe how generous people are. You know, I wouldn't let myself in, but they were letting us in. It was very, very generous so that we could just go in, check on our toad. More than likely it was going to move again, but there's a chance it was going to overwinter and we were going to have to go in there every week through the winter. So extremely generous. So in conclusion, although toads are really wide ranging and they're actually quite adaptable in the sense that they're in a lot of different types of landscapes, they will utilize a variety of upland habitats. They can't adapt their way out of their need to move through the landscape safely. There's no way they're going to be able to change or adjust to changes in the landscape. Urban development and roads are the biggest threat to their survival and their persistence, and it really doesn't take much traffic. So even when we have the types of landscapes like we have out in Cedar, which are, you know, big hobby farms, that can still cause a lot of mortality, never mind the densities that we have around here and around the Lindley Valley, that sort of thing where we've got amphibians. So we really have to take a landscape level approach with a species like this. The CVRD down in Cowichan was including some bullets in their official community plan. All I could get in my head was the acronym, official community plan, originally when it was written. I haven't been able to see anything recently to see whether or not it's still continuing, but there's definitely a lot of people that are trying to protect toads down there. And it's really going to take people from all different sorts of industries, private landowners, et cetera, to make sure that we can protect a species, and we have to have the will. So, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
There's such a thing as turtle crossing signs. Could we use toad crossing signs?
Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, for sure. So the question was, we've got a lot of turtle crossing signs. Can we use toad crossing signs? We have some signs down at our Duncan site that the Ministry of Transportation put out, but to be honest, I don't think that really makes much difference. I just find it really surprising how this is a site where you could take an alternate route around and people aren't willing to do that. It's just that extra, 5 minutes is too much for them. So, yeah, so for sure, sign is definitely one of the perks of signage is it helps to raise awareness, which is always a good thing. So, yeah. Clear as mud. Excellent. Yes.
So you mentioned the toxin, so what is it they have, and it's in their skin, I presume?
Yeah, it's a bufotoxin. That used to be their genus was bufo. Yeah. Now they're Anaxaris is the genus. I don't know anything about that particular toxin, but they have the big parotoid glands behind their eyes. And then that's really what the bumps are on the skin, is that that's where they can exude the toxin. So I've handled many toads, never had any issues. The only time I've had them exude the toxin was I had one with a belt on and I had to get the transmitter from the toad and she had gone into a hole. So I'm digging in a hole. I must have just felt like an otter coming after her or something. And so she just started exuding all this white toxin and it's very sticky and quite noxious. Yeah. Yes.
Other than automobiles, do they have any predators?
Oh,
Like
definitely.
there are 60,000 eggs. They don't all survive.
No.
Something eats them.
Yeah, it's actually a very low survival rate. So for all of the aquatic breeding amphibians,
So what eats them?
So when they're young, it already starts in the egg stage. You're gonna have
Yeah.
things that are trying to get into the eggs. I'm not as familiar with the predators on the eggs, but the tadpoles, all of the macroinvertebrates that are in the water, the dragonfly larva, caddisfly, water boatman, everything, yeah, we'll be definitely going after them. Fish will go after them. They do have a toxin, I think, apparently even right as their tadpoles. So apparently they're one of the few native amphibians that can coexist to some degree with fish. And so that may also help them when it comes to the bullfrogs and the green frogs. They might not suffer as much as the other native species. But apparently it's something like, I can't remember the number now, it's extremely low. It's like a 1% chance of surviving from egg length all the way through your first year. It's really low. So, yeah, and once they get through that year, then the survival rate just goes really high. Yeah. Yes.
Well, we were at Spider Lake a few years ago in
Mhm.
the summer.
Yep.
And at one end of the lake, there was hundreds of these little flies. So.
The tadpoles,
collect
yeah,
them,
yeah.
But they were actually wrong.
Yep, yep,
They were all over the shore.
Yeah.
Of spreading it.
exactly, yeah.
But yeah, there's literally hundreds.
Yes, so Spider Lake is a site that I've gone and done a little bit of monitoring. They're interesting, they're breeding like at quite a far other end of the lake actually was where they're laying their eggs, but the tadpoles move around so much and then they end up coming, unfortunately, right on the beach side. They have a thing for beaches, which is really not convenient as well. And they do tend to want to come out right where all the picnickers are. And that's a spot where BC Parks has put a few sandwich boards and things like that out, but they really haven't tried to filter them in a particular direction. Kids love to play with them, and I'm of two minds with that. I think it's great for kids to be able to handle things. And amphibians are almost like your gateway into being a biologist or a naturalist. They're one of the great organisms really to get a close-up look at, to handle. Their metamorphosis is fascinating for a child. So I think they're really a great group that way. So I'm not too chuffed about kids catching the odd tadpole or playing with the metamorphs. Yeah. Sure.
In Courtney and Camp River, there's a section of highway there where there's
The fence. Yeah.
mesh, so that's something.
Not personally, but yeah, that's exactly what that's for. So for some reason on Vancouver Island, we have some patchy places where you do have toads, and then other places we don't have any at all. And so in that area up there, sort of Courtney to Campbell River, Merville area is one of those areas where we have multiple breeding sites. And then down in this Cowichan Valley is also multiple breeding sites. Like we just have one here in Nanaimo. I think, and then I think there's one in Lanceville. So they're pretty spread out. So yes, we up around what we call the Ham Road area. When they put the new highway in, they did put in a number of underpasses. And when they put the elk fencing in, they put a finer mesh along the bottom to try to intercept the toads and direct them towards those underpasses. I don't know the status of the population lately. The fencing unfortunately requires maintenance, of course. As soon as you get grasses and vegetation growing, it just leans on the fence and they've just got a perfect way to walk over top. And unfortunately, MOT doesn't do maintenance, so it's a struggle. Yeah. Yes, Linda.
So federally, they're listed,
Yeah.
but not provincially. What's that?
Yeah, so they were listed provincially. So when we wrote this, the very first COSEWIC status report, I can't remember what year we wrote that. Aging myself, I think it was 2002 or something. We had actually recommended that they have a different status for the lower mainland Vancouver Island. We know that they're declining in this area, or that they're not very high density. There's some stuff going on down here. They're more at risk. And then for the mainland, why not give them a different status? They wouldn't do that. So they did list the whole population, which is problematic for a lot of different industries and things like that, the extra hoops they have to jump through now because you've got a listed species. But they also changed the way that they do the listing. And so the last assessment, in terms of just the way they do the calculation now and the points, literally the points you get in, it doesn't end up being listed anymore. So they had to downlist the species, but it's still listed federally. That didn't change. Yeah, because that's just a whole different listing system. They're not just thinking about BC, even though they're only in BC. They think about on a broader scale, I guess. Yeah. Yes.
What's the level of concern for like the kitchen fungus?
Good question. It got really, the topic got really hot for a while and it's really kind of petered out lately, as at least in terms of how much I'm hearing it. There's a more recent one now. Now there's more of a concern around a salamander disease. So what I can tell you is that they did, the provincial government did go around the province and took samples and tested amphibians. And basically what we found is it's actually all over the place, but we don't have any obvious declines of amphibians. So we have to follow lots of disinfection and hygiene protocols when we're out working in the field to try and minimize, the spread of lots of different types of diseases. It's not just chytrid. But really, we're not seeing any obvious declines. So we're not sure. Our amphibians here seem to be okay. A lot of the big declines actually happen down in the tropics. So there seems to be a temperature relationship and it seems to kill them when they're overwintering. So there might be just something going on there that puts it out of balance down there. So yes.
If we're gonna have more questions, would you mind repeating the question the next round?
Oh, sure.
For those of us, it might be a bit hard of hearing.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. What do toads eat, and does the availability of food affect their movement?
What do toads eat and what does the availability of food, how does it affect their movements?
Yeah.
So you're just talking terrestrially, are we just talking adults? Because the tadpoles, let's get into the biology. So the tadpoles are vegetarians. So they're breathing through gills, vegetarians, eating algae, that sort of thing. When they go through that crazy metamorphosis stage, they're switching from gills to lungs, and they're switching from being a vegetarian to a carnivore. So there is so much going on in their body. They're incredibly vulnerable when they're really small. And then now you've got 4 legs and you still have a tail. You're not a good swimmer anymore. You're not a good walker. Your digestion is changing. Your ability to breathe is changing. It's really awkward. It's the teenage years, absolutely. So they're switching then. So now we have, little toadlets on land, big toads on land. They're carnivores. So they're eating all sorts of invertebrates, you name it, they're going to eat it. When you have a really large toad, I don't know if they would potentially eat a small frog if they came across it, or a small snake or anything like that. I imagine if it's something that moves in front of their face, they'll try to get it. Before we did our telemetry work, we actually had some in a controlled study at Morel for 3 weeks, and we tested different types of fittings for those belts for the transmitters. So we were feeding them by hand. A lot of times we were just feeding them earthworms, and we had to keep track of who was eating, who wasn't eating. So you're literally tweezers, and I can tell you they're not very good at catching food. So they probably, like most animals, they have a lot of attempts and 10% success rate, but they'll probably just whatever they can get. But it's definitely carnivore. Yes.
Seen some of the eggs or patches of eggs turning white.
Yeah.
Are they those? I'm guessing they're dead, and do you know what would cause that?
Yeah, so sometimes because they tend to lay very shallow, this is another reason that they're particularly vulnerable, is they're laying in really shallow water at this time of year. Well, look at what the temperature's been doing at night and then during the day. We're just all over the place. So they're still really vulnerable to freezing. And because they're laying so shallow, you are going to get the odd egg that's right at the surface that dies. Once it dies, there's a natural water mold, a saprolegnia, that's in the water, will get into the egg mass because of those dead eggs. But then once it's in the dead eggs, it will just start spreading, and sometimes it will actually result in killing more eggs within the egg streams. And I see it more so, I find, with the toads than I do with the jelly masses, which tend to be laid a little bit more underwater. So it's something about the structure of the string and being so shallow, it seems to spread really quickly. Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, there's a couple of questions on chat too.
Okay.
I can read them to you if you want, or.
Yeah, if you could read them, Judy, that would be great.
So, do toads that breed in Morel Lake also overwinter in the forest there?
That's a good question. We haven't done telemetry, or sorry, probably could you hear that? Asking whether the toads here at Morel are also overwintering in the forest. We haven't done radio telemetry on that population. They've done a very extensive mark recapture on that population. So we're getting an idea of how big the population is and how much it's changing, how long the toads are surviving, how often the females breed, because we think that they generally skip a year because it's so energetic for them to breed. So the short answer would be yes, based on our research, we would suspect that they are overwintering within the kilometer around the lake. And our Duncan work would suggest it would be where they're going to have edges. So probably right along that hydro right of way is probably one of the places that they're going to like, especially south facing sides.
So what about the lifespan?
Great question. So the toads reach sexual maturity between, I think the males, it's about 3 years, and the females, it's about 5 or 6 years they reach sexual maturity. And we think they only live to about 10 years or so. And one study in Oregon, in that population, they were definitely skipping years for breeding. So there's the potential that a female might only breed like 2 or 3 times in her life. So yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Yes.
I was just wondering what drew you to amphibians as a focus of your research to start with?
I would love to say that, I grew up just catching tadpoles and I was just a passion of mine my whole life, but no, I've just always liked nature, and I was looking for a grad program. And it was either going to be moose or bats or amphibians, and the funding for the amphibians came out in first. So yeah, it was just the way it went. And then it turned out to be perfect timing, because that was right around the time that we were all of a sudden starting to notice all these amphibian declines around the world. And so all of a sudden, a lot of funding got put into it, and there was opportunities for research. And weirdly, I've been able to stay in this one taxonomic group my whole life and managed to survive. So yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.